Hi, I actually made a video a few days ago on this subject, these discs, but I decided not to post it because it was, shall we say, particularly unhinged. No, maybe not unhinged, but I think I could maybe explain myself better if I tried again. So anyway, so one of these I've showed before. I've talked about before. The other two I got about a month ago, and this one is the one I picked up on Monday afternoon, I believe. But I'm going to kind of try and link these together and talk about why I have them, because there's not really any real reason why I would have these. These are 4 CD-ROMs from the mid-90s, and I don't have a computer with a CD-ROM drive. I don't think anyone does. Well, I'm sure you can still buy them, maybe as kind of like a external CD-ROM drive, but it's certainly not the kind of thing that comes stock with a computer nowadays, a laptop or desktop. But so I'll start from the beginning. So in 1995, my family got our first home computer. I would have been about 14 years old at that time, and it was like a big thing in my life. It was kind of felt like a bit of a turning point in some ways in my life, kind of like opening up. I had always been kind of interested in computers as a kid, but we never had a computer. And whenever I went to any of my friends, all my friends had computers. Our family was kind of the last family in my friend group, or our family friend group, who had a computer. And anyway, I'd always been kind of attracted to computers, like kind of like something that always kind of like pulled me towards them as a kid, but I'd never had one. I used to buy computer magazines, like computer game magazines, and I'd even have a computer to play games on. I was just kind of interested in them. And anyway, so we got one. And I can't really put into words how that felt. It felt like the future had opened up in my life, in a way. And that might sound over dramatic and I don't know, not true, but it really did feel that way. You've got to remember, this was, like I said, 1995. So my parents well, actually my grandmother was the one who paid for it. She paid for it, but whatever. We got the computer. They bought it from from some friends at their church. So my parents, when I was a kid, I went to church as well with my parents, and there's a lot of family groups in the church, and they all kind of like, if someone needed something done, they would go like, this guy was a plumber, and this guy was an electrician, and this guy was a mechanic, or this woman was an accountant, and this person was this and that. And so one of the families had a computer shop, and they kind of set up a little deal for us, and they gave us a package with a top of the range at the time. I think it was like a 486 computer, and a bunch of software to go with it. And two of the things that they gave us were these two here. Now, I bought these, like I said, a month ago. I just found them, and it's just, as soon as I see that kind of that case or that cover, it kind of brings back a lot of nostalgia and memories and different kinds of feelings. So it's Encarta 95. So we got that, and I remember that was probably the program I used the most. If you don't know what Encarta is, it says here a complete interactive multimedia encyclopedia, and that's what it is. It's an encyclopedia on CD-ROM. I guess it's like what Wikipedia is now, but a lot smaller. Obviously, Wikipedia is massive. Encarta 95 was much more restricted, much more like a traditional encyclopedia, the kind of subjects it covered, but it had the added feature of having videos you could watch to illustrate things, or animations, these kind of like animations of scientific principles. Like I remember the Doppler effect would show how the Doppler effect worked, or all sorts of different things. And it also had sound files. Like I remember under the Soundgarden, or maybe it was the Grunge, one of the articles, and it had a clip of a Soundgarden song. It was the song "Nothing to Say" off what album's that off? Screaming Life? I think it's off Screaming Life. Regardless, I had a Soundgarden clip, and it had other bits and pieces, and it was just the ability to kind of read about any, or at the time felt like any subject you wanted to read about. And it would have like these cool pictures, and that for me as a kind of a curious kid who was really into learning stuff, I guess, or learning the stuff that I was interested in, it was just amazing. And so it's kind of very symbolic, this disc of that part of my childhood, early teenage years. The other one here, which we also got at the time when my parents, or my grandmother bought this, was Microsoft Works. Microsoft Works is basically a suite of programs. It's basically what Microsoft Office became. Maybe Microsoft Office existed at this time, I'm not sure. And you know, Microsoft Office is what? Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, a couple of other ones. This one's basically, I think it's like it's a word processor. It's not exactly Microsoft Word, but it's basically a word processor, a spreadsheet, like Excel. I think it had like a kind of database tool, a Microsoft Access, like kind of the email program that kind of you can use to get the most out of an email system. It also says it includes Microsoft Money 3.0, which was a accounting program, a very kind of simple accounting program. So I remember using this a lot for school projects, writing essays and stuff like that, and reports and stuff like that using the word processor. I remember we had an absolute bloody pig of a printer. It was one of those dot matrix ones, like it would go along the line with like a ribbon, and it was so shit. And then eventually, I think not too long after, we realized that it was just terrible, and they upgraded the printer to like a inkjet one, which wasn't that much better, to be honest, but it was better than a fucking dot matrix ribbon printer. The other one here, I showed this a few months ago. I got this late last year, I think, and I didn't actually own this, but I remember I had a catalog, like a brochure of all the Microsoft Home programs that you could get, and there was like a movie one, like I think Microsoft Home Cinema, and different Microsoft screensaver packages. Like I think I've said before, we had the Extreme Sports screensaver package. That was one of the thing we got in the bundle of software that the people gave us. And one of them was this one, Dangerous Creatures. And I always thought the cover looked really good. It looks like kind of one of those 1990s puzzles with kind of various wildlife on the front all together. A leopard, a bear, a poison dart frog. But I never actually looked at this program because we never owned it. So I actually don't know what it was. I assume it was kind of just like it has information about dangerous creatures and maybe kind of some kind of activities you can do, because and Carter had activities as well, like mind maze and matching instruments at different parts of the world, and you know what I'm talking about if you used it. And I'm sure if you are of a similar age of me, if you're in your late 30s through 40s, maybe even into your late 40s, you probably are familiar with some of these, because the home computer kind of had its what do you want to call it? It really came into its own in the mid-90s, and that's kind of where, if you look at statistics, like graphs and tables of the penetration of computers into the average family home, and you see that it was a massive uptick around the mid-90s, where it became more affordable and maybe a bit more necessary. Necessary is obviously a relative word, but like I said, like when I was at school, people were starting to use computers for work that we did at school. And we had a computer class at school. And then by the time I got to university, which was later, the late 90s, early 2000s, it was absolutely necessary to have a computer. You couldn't you probably could, but no one was handing in a handwritten essay, 3,000 word essay. You had to print it out, write it on a computer. But what am I trying to say? I guess when I look at these things, I get, like I said, a kind of nostalgic feeling that I'm just remembering using them and think, oh, I remember that thing. I remember I used to do that and that. Oh, I remember the feelings I had. But not just that. I think more of it is that time, and this has been spoken a lot about by other people and written about, so it's not as though I'm expressing anything unique or new here, but that time in the world in the 1990s, there was a much more positive feeling about the future. And technology was seen as a big part of that future and of the possibilities and the promises of tomorrow or the future in general. We're like, it was going to be a lot better and it was going to help us in so many ways. And it was so kind of almost like utopian. And when I look at those Microsoft programs from the 90s and I remember things like Windows 95 and stuff like that, it does feel like it was much more, I don't know the word. I guess it's optimistic, I guess is the word that I really am. It's the best overall word I can use for it. It is something a bit deeper than that, but there was a definite form of optimism. And I think that connects together with also my memories of the kind of educational programs that used to be on TV and we used to watch at school. Like, I guess, they're made for kind of kids, not for little kids, but like public access type stuff. Like I remember there was a public access TV station in my city, Auckland, in the mid to late 90s. I think it was called Auckland TV. It changed into Triangle TV. And they used to play these random public access. They weren't New Zealand produced. It was all American and Canadian stuff. But it was about like scientific principles and like they would just like pick a topic and it would have a half an hour show explaining it. And again, there was this real, whenever they talked about these kind of scientific things and the future and stuff like that, it was always with this overall vibe of optimism and looking forward to the future, how it's going to be so great and all these great things are going to happen and so your life is going to be so much easier. And then, we are living in that future now, I guess, almost 25, 30 years later, and we see that many of those promises have not come to pass, that the technology is obviously leapt ahead in leaps and bounds beyond what we could even imagine in some ways, with things like smartphones and tablet computers, and there's the primacy and the omnipresence of the internet and all the rest of it. But it hasn't really served us in the way that it could have. And in many ways, it kind of has seemed almost to be a net negative in many ways, like in the things that it's produced, just the advent of social media and just how that's really had many, many, many negative effects on society. And just how like tech companies, it's more and more kind of like controlling our lives, whether we want to be part of it or not. You want to go shopping and you've got to have this app downloaded to get this deal. If you don't have it, you can't check out properly. And it's like, it's just every day it seems like something more. And I'm a 40-some-year-old man, early 40s man. And if I feel this way, then I think about my parents. My parents are like, in their 70s or 80s. And I think, how do they feel? I remember I used to be puzzled when my dad used to get angry about this kind of stuff when I was not a kid, but more when I was kind of, again, at this age, in my teens, 20s. He used to get really pissed off about having to, like, companies, you could only communicate by email. And you can now I can kind of understand it, whereas you kind of like feel like you're being forced into these modes, whether you want to or not, because it's so hard to operate in the modern world. If if you chose to not have a smartphone, a cell phone, no email address, just those two things there, it would hamper your life in many ways. Of course, and many people wouldn't care about that, and there are some people who choose not to have those things. But you are limiting your life and opportunities. Like in my job, for example, I have to use an iPad and I have to use a cell phone. It's part of the job. If I didn't do those two things, I would be fired. Well, not fired, but they would try to remedy it. If I denied to do it, they would say, well, we've got to let you go. It's part of the job. Got to carry with you at all times. And so I guess I was talking to my wife it wasn't the other day, it was probably about 3 months ago, and I said, sometimes I wish that I could keep my life as it is. Like I'm married, I'm my age I am now, I have a kid, I work the job I work, but that we could just all go back to like 1995. And I'm sure there are a million things I'm not even thinking about that would be worse off. And I'd be like, things that we just are so normal now that we don't even remember that they're part of our lives and they make our lives easier. At the same time, I think I would be willing to give up most of those things because I lived in that time, as I'm sure anyone who's listening to this also did. And it's not as though life was hard and it was like, I wish this thing would be invented so I could order a pizza from my phone and not have to talk to a human or something like that. These things are not massive inconveniences. They're kind of little things that kind of are around the edges of our life that make things a little bit easier, but not that different really. Same with banking. Banking, I don't know what it's like in your country, but in New Zealand, certainly banking is easy nowadays because of apps. The banking app I have, I can pay all my bills within 5 minutes. I can move money around to different accounts I need. I can transfer to people who I owe money to or pay for things I want to pay for, and it's all done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But again, going to the bank to do those things or going to the post office to pay the bills or things it's not as though now I've got all this time and I'm fucking using it to do amazing things. The time that I have is now just filled with other busy work, like having to fight traffic or spinning some other plate so that I can do this or do that. It's not as though the time that we've saved has given us more leisure time, which I guess was the promise, wasn't it? That people talk about that after the war and, in the 1940s and the 1950s, they talked about that, these technological advances. In 20 years, people will only be working 3 days a week for 20 hours and all the rest of the time will be leisure time. My dad tells me that. He said he remember when he was a kid, that's what they used to say to him. And it's, if anything, obviously, again, working was harder in many ways back then, but we're still all working a lot. And sometimes doing that even is not enough to make ends meet for many people. You hear people working two jobs, a full-time job and a part-time job, and they're just able to pay their rent and buy food and barely save any money on top of that. And once you have a family, that compounds all that. And so I guess I'm kind of moaning here about the modern world, but I guess it's kind of looking at these things from my youth, connected to technology, and the feelings around them kind of just reminds me of all that, of the things that were lost. But I'm sure, often you see people writing in comments on YouTube, everyone says that about their child, doesn't it? You see people being nostalgic for the 2010s, people who are 20 now, they feel nostalgic for 2011 or something, or 2013, that was their childhood or their youth. So maybe that's just the way it is, and every generation, every person goes through that same thing, longing for the youth. Is it maybe I'm just longing for my youth? But I don't think it really is that, because there was lots of things in my youth that weren't so great and that I don't really miss. And in some ways I kind of like myself more now. Yeah, actually, maybe anyway, that's a separate issue. But it's hard to kind of fully put all that, because I know everything I say, there's so many caveats around it. And how about that? But did you think about that? Or how this part of your life is so much easier now? Don't you think this? And back then this was shit. And it's like, yes, those things are all true. And it's all a moot point anyway, because we can't do it. You can't go back in time. That's not going to be happening. The last one, the one that I got most recently, that kind of kicked off all this, was this one here, the TIE Fighter game by Lucas Arts. This came out around the same. This would have been about a 94, 95 release. There was 3 Star Wars games on PC that I remember. This one, X-Wing, which is kind of the companion, TIE Fighter, the baddies, X-Wing, the goodies, and Rebel Assault. Rebel Assault I really liked, but then I was just, because I hadn't thought about Rebel Assault for years. And then I was just reading the review a couple of days ago after I bought this, trying to kind of jog my memory. And it got really bad reviews at the time. I was quite surprised. I loved that game as a kid. I loved Star Wars as a kid. Star Wars was kind of my thing. When I was a teenager, nobody knows as a teenager, a kid and a teenager. Music, rock music, metal, and Star Wars were kind of it for me. And so this was, if you can remember, there was a period there where Star Wars had kind of like a bit of a lull, or a bit of almost like a dead period. So, obviously the Star Wars movies came out in the late 70s, early 80s, and I was like a baby. I wasn't even alive when the original way. I was only alive for Return of the Jedi, because the other ones came out before I was born. But I remember one of my first memories of watching a movie as a kid was watching Return of the Jedi. This wouldn't have been 1983. This would have been probably I was about 5 or something. I remember the scene where Luke was going to be thrown into the Sarlacc pit, and R2-D2 shot the lightsaber to him, and I remember being blown away by that. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And since then, I just was in love with Star Wars. And so kind of through the late 80s and into the early 90s, Star Wars had a decline, not even a decline, it's just like the natural progression of a movie. A movie's massively popular and everyone gets into it and the merchandise is sold, and then kind of slowly it kind of fades away and the new things come. So, like Ghostbusters or Indiana Jones or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever else was big at that time. But that was when I was kind of most into it, was in the kind of early 90s. And the toys, you go to the shops now, there's Star Wars toys, they've re-released all those old Kenner ones from the original trilogy and from the new movies. There's all sorts of, and they're fucking expensive as well. And the spaceships, and if you go to specialty stores, like the kind of like I guess what we call nerd stores, they got amazing shit, like just fucking shelves and shelves of every character and vehicle. But in the 90s, what I'm talking about, this is pre George Lucas redoing the original trilogy. Like he kind of revamped them and kind of digitized them and put some new effects, and that kind of started their popularity again. And then, but it was like I said, it would have been about from 91 through to about 95, 96. And you didn't actually find that much Star Wars merchandise around. And so I used to get it. My mum used to buy it for me for Christmas. I had all sorts of cars. I've lost all that. I've got a few little bits and pieces I kept. But man, when I think about that kind of stuff I lost, that kind of makes me sad. And anyway, these games were released around that time. So obviously I'm not saying there was no one like Star Wars. Obviously people liked it. They were releasing games that sold hundreds of thousands of copies. But then obviously they did the prequels in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it kind of re-exploded. And then they fucking, I shouldn't say that. They've done what they've done now with the more recent sequels. Episode 8, 9, 10, no, is it 7, 8, 9? Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7, 8, 9. And I liked the first one they did. Was it the I don't even know the names of them though. The first one they did where, you know, Rey was discovered, and she, you know, all the characters that introduced Kylo Ren and Han. Sorry to give it away, but Han got killed and all that. That first one, I actually thought I enjoyed that. It was a nice kind of shot of nostalgia, seeing all those old characters and kind of moving the story along. But then the one after that, I was iffy on. Rogue One, I thought it was okay. I really liked the ending of that movie. I thought it was a little bit slow in the middle. The last one of the sequel, Episode 9, the one where the Emperor came back, was fucking appalling. And maybe it's clouded extra because of my love for Star Wars, but that killed it for me. I thought, I'm done. If you're going to make a movie that bad, I give up. And so I haven't watched any of the stuff like The Mandalorian or what did they made? I think they made a Lando movie or an Obi-Wan series. I've watched clips of it. There was actually a good clip on YouTube of Obi-Wan fighting Darth Vader in the more recent series. But then I read reviews and a lot of people said, don't watch it. It's shit. And they've just kind of like, they've taken something that was special and just kind of, continuing to do it now, just, you know, driving it into the ground. But anyway, I love this game. I loved all those Lucas Arts games. Not just the Star Wars ones. Remember, like there was Monkey Island. And, well, there was another one as well. I was just reading through a list of them and a name jumped out at me. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a Lucas Arts game. But anyway, the Star Wars ones, like I said, TIE Fighter, X-Wing, and Rebel Assault. Now, who knows? I might never, ever have a chance to play this on the disc because, like I said, I don't think I'm going to be in the possession of a CD-ROM drive or a computer that can actually play it. But who knows? And I just felt like I wanted to buy these things. Those things that kind of had such a integral and important part of my youth and my hopes for the future smashed upon the rocks of the present. But they were only $1 or 50 cents each, so what the hell? And who knows, I might buy more. I think I said if I can find more of those Microsoft Home products, specifically of that time, I will buy them. But if it's later than that, if I don't actually have a connection to it, like Microsoft Encarta 97, for example, I've never seen and I have no idea about, so I wouldn't buy that. But if it's something I actually owned or wanted to own, I will buy it. So anyway, maybe that was a bit more lucid than the previous one. Maybe not. It's almost 28 minutes, so I better leave it there. But hopefully you've understood some of what I'm talking. Maybe you can relate to it, maybe not. To be honest, I don't think anyone would have watched all 28 minutes of this, but if you have, I sincerely thank you. And I hope you are doing well, and I will see you again.